Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp, RMO, on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario, with grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program to test numerous targets located by recent groundwork is planned for early 2018. Please visit our website at rmroyalty.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims. She's the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's interesting, you've just done an article for the Vancouver province about how much it would cost BC if Alberta decided to turn off the taps in this Kinder Morgan pipeline dispute.
I have, and I just wanted to do some rough math because a lot of people were just throwing numbers around and wondering how much this is going to cost. And as of right now, in Metro Vancouver Lower Mainland, we're seeing prices at some stations at $1.57 for regular gasoline per liter. So we're already dealing with the record-breaking high gasoline prices in that region. And so I wanted to know, what if Alberta and Saskatchewan in lockstep make good on their threat and they turn off the taps? They make it so that all of the oil and gas that is transported to British Columbia is up to them. Keep in mind that the legislation that they introduced in Alberta isn't just about pipelines. The legislation also says by train and by truck. So it sounds like they're ready to play hardball. And so I took a look at it and just, surmised. What if we went over $2 a liter? What if we went actually to $2.50 a liter? Could we see that by the end of the summer if this continues in this way? And so I did an estimate on how much it costs you to drive from, say, Langley to downtown Vancouver. And on average right now, it's about $14. Say you're driving something simple like a Toyota Camry or a Nissan Rogue. That's a very average car with average mileage. And they get about 11 kilometers per liter after the conversion for Canada. And so I started doing the math, and if you have a gas jump up to $2.50, just to use a number, you're going to have to pay more than $200 extra per month for just that one vehicle. And then if you start adding up things like, what if you have two cars in your household? What if you've got two parents or two working people and you both need to get to work? That starts adding up. And then also, every single thing that we eat and that we buy gets shipped to us by truck or even by train. And all of those use fossil fuels. All of those use oil and gas. So all of that money will have to come from somewhere. Does that mean that our costs are going to go up right at our stores? And then you start need to factor in things like cities and municipalities who have to run things like transit, buses that run on diesel fuel in some cases, or their fleets of service vehicles. What happens to those big BC hydro trucks that take an enormous amount of fuel? Just the cost of living here is staggering already. And if we see gas spike up to a crazy amount, over $2 a liter, we're really going to feel it and we're really going to pay for it. And I'm worried that people just don't have that money. A lot of people, especially in the Lower Mainland and the South Island, are already living paycheck to paycheck. Some people are dipping into their savings or even going into debt in order to pay for basic bills, just because things like housing and gasoline are already so expensive. Where are they going to find $200 extra per month? And so I think sometimes this is something that our politicians forget, because sometimes they might live in downtown urban areas. They've been immune from the cost of living for a while. They perhaps have their housing paid for. They might have their gasoline or their vehicles paid for. And they can quickly become out of touch with how much it costs average working people to get around.
Now, I know the BC government says if they do it, they'll sue because they believe it's unconstitutional. But could you sue the BC government because they're the ones who caused the problem?
That's a great question. If the BC government, though, goes and sues Alberta, who's paying for that? You and I are paying for that. Taxpayers are paying for that. And I think what government needs to remember is that they don't operate in a vacuum. And so you're right. It could be that, say, a corporation or even a city or a municipality, who knows, maybe they'll turn around and try to sue the government of British Columbia, try to sue Victoria for damages incurred or losses. This is why this is such a deadly serious issue. You know, we've got this crisis going on in Canada right now where people are so angry. In Alberta, for example, they're actually threatening the idea of seceding somehow from the union. And I know for a lot of people that sounds like hot air, but the sentiment is there and the feeling is real. And even if they don't, you know, say that they're going to have a referendum to leave, of course, it's that feeling that can cause businesses to leave. It can cause people to be less productive. It can make them give up and throw their hands in the air and say, you know, why am I working so hard at something like this when the country doesn't appreciate me and I feel my neighbors don't have my back and that my government doesn't represent me? And so to hear things like, you know, coming from the Green Party leader here in British Columbia, that oil and gas aren't drivers of our economy, you know, that's just fundamentally untrue. Nearly every single thing we do, from the moment we wake up in the morning and start getting our breakfast together to coming home at night, requires oil and gas. If it's not driving your own vehicle, it's taking transit, which uses oil and gas, or getting goods and services that are produced using oil and gas. Even that bus that you might be taking to work, it was constructed using power and using generation and using oil and gas products, not to mention the minerals and all the other construction materials that go into something like that. So I think, unfortunately, some folks who are making these decisions in Victoria have become completely out of touch with just how much we rely on natural resources, including oil and gas, in this province. And so that's one of the reasons why the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has signed on with a bunch of other groups urging the federal government to take action. It's called the Confidence in Canada movement, saying that the feds need to step in here and say, get this thing built.
Well, if Alberta is going to cut off Alberta's oil and gas, what if BC said, well, we're not going to handle your grain shipments anymore from Saskatchewan and Alberta? What would that do to their economies?
Exactly. And then what happens? And then we start saying that we're no longer, or what if Saskatchewan gets involved because they've teamed up with Alberta saying that they're going to block oil and gas coming over to BC? What if we decide to start blocking all their stuff coming out of Saskatchewan as well? So because keep in mind, they have a lot of mining coming out of Saskatchewan too. It isn't just all the food that we depend on. And you're absolutely right to point out grain. A massive amount of our international trade is in grain products, oil seeds, wheat, all that stuff. In fact, quite often when you'll hear the federal government, at least this was the case years ago, when you hear the federal government say things like, we're writing off the debt that, you know, country A owes us. It could be anything. It could be Russia, it could be Honduras, you name it. Quite often, actually, what that means is that they're writing off grain debt. That's how much grain factors into our economy as well. And you're right. It's all coming through British Columbia if they're using the western ports. And what happens then if they start getting into this massive trade war? This isn't really good for anybody, and it's frankly one of the reasons why we have jurisdictional boundaries. It's one of the reasons why the federal government deals with things like oil and gas. It's one of the reasons why the province deals with other items, and now we're in this massive fight, and we're worried that it's going to get worse.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Aven Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aven's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avenresources.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Kris Sims. Kris, you've done another article, too. It looks like the newspapers are depending on you because they don't have reporters anymore. For the National Post, you've done an article about carbon tax. What are you going to tell us there?
I just wanted to warn the rest of Canada about the experience of British Columbia. Being born and raised here in BC, I'm very proud British Columbian, and then I worked in Ottawa and also in Nova Scotia for a long time. And for the longest time in newsrooms and on Parliament Hill, you'd hear things like, oh, British Columbia has a carbon tax and it's revenue neutral. And it was kind of this intonement. It was almost as if it was some magic formula that would somehow clean up the environment and cost us nothing, revenue neutral. But that's not the case, of course. And so as we saw in the last few budgets, when it was still being called revenue neutral, all that meant was they would say take in, for argument's sake, $1 billion with the BC carbon tax. They would put that in a frame on the budget document called revenue neutral BC carbon tax, $1 billion. And then what they did is scrape together a bunch of miscellaneous and sundry tax credits. Everything from the children's fitness tax credit to the home renovation tax credit for seniors to the Northern Living Allowance, you name it. Just random stuff that you see in any provincial or federal budget. But this time they took those credits and stuffed them inside the framework called revenue neutral carbon tax, made that balance out to zero, and abracadabra revenue neutral. That's all that meant. And so for us, we find this to be a really crass puppet show, because for the longest time we were telling the rest of the country, oh, revenue neutral, again, as if it somehow magically cleaned up the environment and cost everybody nothing. But it's not true. It costs us a lot of money. And so I wanted to warn other parts of Canada while they're having the conversation about carbon tax. It's such a relief to see Ontario, of all places, finally waking up and saying, wait a minute, we don't want a carbon tax, and seeing Saskatchewan fighting back against the federal government saying we don't want a carbon tax. This is all in the midst of the federal government and the federal minister responsible for this not having any idea what kind of impact it'll have. When questioned both on national television and in committee, they can't give you an estimate on what kind of an impact it'll have. And they apparently know what kind of financial impact it'll have on Canadians, meaning how much it will cost all of us, but they won't tell us. That's not transparent and it's not democratic. So, for example, in BC, at least when they were calling the thing revenue neutral, they had a requirement that they had to list it in the budget document. And like I said, go through that little dog and pony show like I described, calling it revenue neutral and showing it in the paper. But now, because they've removed the term revenue neutral, they no longer need to tell us by law in the budget document anymore how much they're taking in. Now, Finance Minister Carol James says that she's still going to. We're going to have to just take her word at that because it's no longer legally required. And so I wanted to warn Canadians on how much it will actually cost them. And so, for example, if you use the federal formula, right now with a $35 per ton carbon tax, that adds about 8.55 cents per liter for gasoline. If you start doing the math on filling up an average car, something like a Toyota Camry would cost you about $5.99 in carbon tax with GST. Filling up a Dodge Ram pickup truck costs more than $10. If you're filling up one of those bigger Ford Super Duty diesels, the one that you see tradespeople driving all the time, that's more than $17. So you start adding this stuff up and it costs a lot of money. And that's what Canadians aren't being told.
Well, didn't the Parliamentary Budget Office put out a document saying a carbon tax would be harmful to the economy?
Yes, they did. And what's interesting is that the Parliamentary Budget Officer is supposed to be independent. And so we're very thankful to be able to see things like the PBO and the Auditor General and investigative reporters be able to work independently and find this stuff out. And the reason why it would be damaging to the economy is like we just said. We need this stuff to move around and heat our homes and eat. Like everything, like just even think from food production, tilling the soil. All that farm equipment uses oil and gas. Planting the seeds, again, that equipment uses oil and gas. The harvesters, all that stuff is still oil and gas. And then that's not even getting into the production. If you're threshing it out and putting it on trucks and shipping it to either market or to grocery stores, every stage of even something as basic as our food production relies on this. And what was interesting is that they've got documents out a few months ago showing that in Saskatchewan, the farming sector had already reduced their carbon emissions. It had gone down without a carbon tax, but the feds still want to impose one on them. Why? If this goal is to somehow reduce CO2 emissions and Scout's honor, that's the only reason why, if they're reducing it already, why tax them? The answer, unfortunately, is because a tax is always just a tax. It's money taken from people by government. They can dress it up and name it something else, but that's just to get past the watchers. That's just to try to get past voters and say, well, don't you care about the environment? It's a form of ransom.
Well, I think Saskatchewan said they might just rename the gasoline tax the carbon tax, and why not? I mean, it's on the same thing.
It is, and that's brilliantly smart. And actually, New Brunswick thought of doing that as well, because it is a form of taxation, right? You already have gasoline tax, and in most jurisdictions, you have GST or PST added onto that. Then there's an excise tax. We always do our gas tax honesty day. That's coming up next month for the CTF. But you're right. And so New Brunswick thought of doing it, and you're right. I think Saskatchewan's going to try to follow suit. But now the feds will be in a pickle. Because then what are they going to do? Are they going to try to impose a carbon tax over and above the gasoline taxes? How are they going to get that through and argue that? And we're just worried that this is going to wind up with yet another Supreme Court challenge. All of those lawyers and all of those hours and weeks, guess who pays for that? All of us do.
Well, Kris, forget about being a tradesman. Let's get into law school right now.
And argue over paper for months on end.
And yes, and become constitutional experts on interprovincial trade.
They have nice robes, right?
I miss the wig days. We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, Metro Vancouver directors and people who work for Metro Vancouver now have all kinds of perks, a brand new office building, cut rate lunches, cut rate massages. Now they're getting cut rate parking and massive car allowances. Is this a good deal for taxpayers?
No, it's not. And it's, number one, it costs a lot of money. But number two, the hypocrisy is just staggering. And so as we were mentioning, the idea of our political masters and our lawmakers becoming out of touch with the people, the everyday working people, and the cost of living, this matters here too. And so as was found out, they've got half-rate parking. So if for example, your average parking cost at the Metrotown Towers costs $150 a month, they get theirs for $75 a month. And further, these managers, not every staffer, but these managers at Metro Vancouver get close to $1,000 a month for a vehicle allowance. Just think of the vehicle you could lease for that. And guess what? They don't notice the cost of gasoline because they're not paying for it, because vehicle allowance covers stuff like that. And then these are the same people, keep in mind, the Metro Vancouver set, it's that crowd. These are the same people that are trying to impose congestion fees and mobility pricing on all of us. And it's something they're trying to keep under the radar as far as costs go. But they've been holding meetings. I've been to both of them, and they're talking with really grandiose language about places like London, England, and Stockholm, Sweden, about them having mobility pricing and congestion fees. The only problem is that they're leaving out how much it costs. So the cost to get into downtown London is $20 Canadian. If you're driving an older car, it's $37 one day just to get into downtown London. And in Stockholm, it's about $6 or $7 every time you pass a pay point. So if you're going to and from work, that's about $14 per day. That doesn't even touch how much it costs you for gasoline, insurance, parking, all that other stuff. This is the same crowd. This is the sort of things that they're looking at imposing on Vancouver in the Lower Mainland. And this similar set of Metro Vancouver managers and these folks, guess what? They don't pay for any of it. A lot of them have free transit passes that they're not using. They get free parking in some cases, and they get these vehicle allowances. And this is why it leads to decisions like mobility pricing and like congestion fees, because it's easy to impose it on the working peasants if you're not feeling it yourself. And again, that's not a representative democracy. It's not fair.
On another note, the Canadian Revenue Agency has decided that not only is it going to go after retail workers who make minimum wage if they get a discount for buying something, and after waiters and waitresses who get tips. Now they're going after tradespeople who claim mileage. What's the deal there?
Yeah, so this is something that definitely needs a reporter to pick it up and run with it, because I've been getting calls from individuals who are, for example, boilermakers or bricklayers, steel workers, pipe fitters, just randomly because they find, the word taxes online, and then they get my number and they call. And so it's something that we really need labor unions to do some investigative work on here, or a journalist, somebody. But apparently what's happening is, even though these tradespeople are claiming their mileage, say to get from their house in Williams Lake to their job site in Quesnel or Kamloops or Kelowna, even though apparently their mileage that they're claiming for years on end is within the federal rules, I think it's 53 cents per kilometer up to 5,000 clicks, and then anything over 5,000 clicks, according to the CRA website, is 49 cents a kilometer. That's considered, according to them, reasonable kilometers, and that's allowed. But now, according to these guys who are calling me, the CRA is auditing and going back years and years and saying, we've decided retroactively that this is all now income, and we are taxing you on it. And in some cases, these guys are getting bills in the mail of thousands of dollars. And so, when I first heard it, it sounds really alarming. And apparently it's not an isolated incident in BC. And so if anybody's got info on this and are able to get people looking into it, they definitely need your help. These are average working people who are just trying to get to their job sites. And again, they're traveling to and from work. It's not like, they're just getting some bonus, for example, like a vehicle allowance, while living in one city. They're traveling. They're putting out money to fill up their trucks to drive to work. And that, before all this, was considered reasonable, according to the CRA website. And so now it looks like some of these people need some help and some advocacy.
Well, they're also small business people, and it looks like the Trudeau government is continuing their attack on small business people.
Right, and so this was a major push that was happening with small businesses federally. But apparently they've changed it enough that we're hearing from our supporters that it's a bit easier. So they're not, apparently, this is one of my federal colleagues' expertise, Aaron Woodrick. Apparently they've changed it enough so that they can still hand their businesses down through their families. And apparently they've increased the limit on how much they're allowed to keep within their business, meaning how much money of their own money and their own earnings, keep in mind, they're allowed to keep within their company and within their business. And this was critical and very important because for these small business owners, that's all they've got. In some cases, they've mortgaged their homes in order to start these businesses. It's not like they can rely on some really nice pension or retirement plan from a government job that they've never had after they retire and close up shop. These people, in most cases, don't get maternity benefits or any other medical benefits. They need to pay all of their own freight. And it was everything from, your local bake shop owner or your vehicle mechanic who's running his own truck shop to even doctors. When you think about it, most doctors are basically independent business people. They have to pay all the overhead on their clinics, they pay their staff, they pay their receptionists, they pay the nurses, all that stuff. And if one of that doctors, say, gets pregnant and wants to have a baby, they don't get mat leave. They're just out. And so they need to save money within their business model in order to be able to take sick time or pregnancy time or parenting time. And so, yeah, it was interesting to see how many people from all walks of life this was affecting. But apparently, according to what my federal colleague said, they've changed it enough that people aren't as worried about it, but it's something I can update you on at another time if you like. But as of right now, it sounds like they've made enough changes.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Always appreciate it. Thank you.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.